Sometimes, kindness becomes a slow form of self-erasure. You keep giving, not because they deserve it, but because you don't know how to stop. You smile, even when your heart feels heavy. You say, "It's okay," even when it's not. You forgive, even when you're breaking. And somewhere between being good and being kind, you forget what it feels like to be you. This is the cost of being too nice, and it's heavier than most people realize. There's a quiet ache that lives inside people who are too nice. It's not loud. It doesn't scream for attention. It just sits there in the chest, under the ribs, a dull, constant pressure that whispers, "Don't upset anyone. Don't be a burden. Don't make things worse." You've probably felt it, that inner tug that tells you to stay small, to agree when you want to refuse, to smile when you want to scream. It starts early. Maybe someone once made you feel that love had conditions. That affection came only when you were good. So you learned to read the room like a survival skill, studying tones, faces, silences, anticipating others' needs before they even spoke. You became the peacekeeper, the one who smooths over conflict, the one who says, "Don't worry, I'll handle it," even when you're already exhausted. And people love you for it. They really do. They call you kind. They say you have a good heart. But behind those compliments, there's something else, something no one sees, a quiet resentment that builds every time you swallow your truth, a fatigue that comes from always being the strong one, the understanding one, the easy one. You tell yourself it's fine. You tell yourself this is who you are, but deep down you feel it. The slow fading of your own color, the way your laughter doesn't reach your eyes anymore, the way you start apologizing for simply existing too loudly. You start avoiding conflict like it's a wound you can't afford to open. You start shrinking in conversations, letting others talk, nodding at opinions you don't share, pretending to agree, because disagreeing feels like betrayal. You confuse silence with safety, but silence isn't peace. It's suffocation in disguise. Every time you put others first without balance, something inside you dims a little more. It's not that you don't care, it's that you care too much. So much that you forget what boundaries feel like. So much that you mistake being needed for being loved. And that's the cruelest part, because people will take your light without even realizing they're leaving you in the dark. They'll keep asking, and you'll keep giving, because saying no feels like failure, because you've been conditioned to believe that love and self-sacrifice are the same thing. But they're not. Love gives, yes, but it also protects. And when your love doesn't protect you, it's no longer kindness. It's surrender. Sometimes the nicest people become the most quietly broken. They're the ones who listen to everyone else's pain but have no one to listen to theirs. They're the ones who show up even when no one shows up for them. They carry the weight of other people's comfort at the expense of their own peace. And in their quiet generosity, they start to disappear. Their needs become too much. Their emotions become dramatic. Their truth becomes inconvenient. So they bury it deeper and deeper until one day they don't recognize themselves anymore. Being too nice doesn't just exhaust you, it erases you. Little by little, kindness without boundaries turns into quiet self-abandonment. And the saddest part? Most people won't notice until you're gone. Until the warmth they took for granted turns cold. Until they realize that the kindest person in the room was the one silently hurting the most. That's the cost no one talks about. The cost of being too nice is losing the parts of yourself that no one ever thought to protect. Why does this happen? Why do some people become trapped in the endless loop of over-giving, over-apologizing, over-understanding? It's not weakness, it's not lack of confidence, it's trauma disguised as empathy. Many people who are too nice grew up learning that love must be earned, that approval was survival, Maybe they had parents who were unpredictable, calm one day, angry the next, and so they learned to adapt. They learned that being pleasing kept the peace, that blending in meant being safe. And as they grew older, that pattern stayed, morphing into something noble-sounding, kindness. But underneath it's fear, fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of being seen as selfish. You become addicted to harmony. You feel anxiety when others are upset. You rush to fix things that aren't even yours to fix. This is called fawning, a trauma response just like fight, flight, or freeze. It's when your nervous system mistakes people's comfort for safety. So you people please not because you want to, but because your body believes it's the only way to stay loved. It's a deep psychological survival mechanism. If I make everyone happy, I'll be safe. But what happens when that system never turns off? You start living for everyone else's emotions, constantly scanning for disapproval, constantly apologizing, constantly abandoning yourself to stay liked. It's a kind of quiet slavery, because every yes that should have been a no chips away at your sense of self. You become the caretaker of everyone's comfort, but who takes care of yours? You learn to overthink every word before you speak it. You rehearse conversations in your mind, predicting how people might react. You downplay your pain. You even laugh at it just to keep things light. And yet you wonder why you feel so unseen, because no one can see the real you if you never show them the real you. People mistake niceness for goodness, but they're not the same. Goodness has roots. It has boundaries. It says, I can love you and still say no. But niceness? Niceness is performative. It's the smile you wear to avoid being misunderstood. It's the nod you give when your heart disagrees. It's the way you say, no problem, while something inside whispers, this isn't fair. And the more you do it, the more disconnected you become from your own truth. When you live to please, you lose touch with your inner compass. Your emotions become confusing. You feel guilt for resting, shame for saying no, anxiety for simply existing in your own rhythm. You start to believe your worth depends on how useful you are to others. That's why when someone finally appreciates you, it feels intoxicating, because deep down you're starving for validation. You don't just want to be loved, you want to be safe in love. And that's the tragedy. You end up over-delivering in relationships, over-caring, over-giving, and still feeling unseen, because no amount of niceness can fill the emptiness of not being accepted for who you truly are. It's a cycle. You give hoping for peace, but what you get is depletion. You stay quiet, hoping for harmony, but what you get is distance. You play small, hoping to be loved, but what you get is invisibility, until one day you wake up tired of being everyone's comfort zone while no one notices your pain. And that's the moment awareness begins. When you realize that your kindness was never the problem. It was the lack of boundaries that made it hurt. And as you sit with that truth, something begins to unfold quietly inside you. The realization that self-respect is not the enemy of kindness, but its deepest root. For years, you thought that being kind meant being small. You thought goodness required sacrifice. You believed the measure of your worth was how much of yourself you could give away without complaint. But now, as awareness softens the noise inside your mind, you begin to see how backwards that idea always was. What if the most sacred form of kindness begins not with others, but with the self that you have long abandoned? What if love, before it reaches outward, must first return home? The more you sit with this question, the more you sense how far you've drifted from your own center, from the still point of your being where truth resides unbent by approval. You start to remember the moments you silenced your intuition for the sake of peace, and how peace never came. You recall the nights you said yes while your chest whispered no, and how the body kept the memory of every self-betrayal. Each of those moments was a quiet wound, not inflicted by cruelty, but by your unwillingness to honor your own limits. You called it patience. You called it maturity. But beneath those noble words, there was fear. The fear of being unloved if you ever stopped pleasing. Now you can see that fear with gentleness. You no longer scold yourself for it. You understand that it was not weakness, but strategy, a way of surviving in a world that often confuses compliance with virtue. You learned to please because it kept you safe. But survival is not the same as living, and safety bought with self-erasure eventually feels like suffocation. As this truth ripens, you begin to sense the invisible architecture of human conditioning. From childhood, you were praised for being easy. You were told you were good when you didn't argue, mature when you swallowed pain, selfless when you gave more than you had. Society built an altar to your niceness and told you that worshiping at it would make you worthy. But worth cannot be earned by depletion. Worth is inherent. It is the quiet, unnegotiable dignity of simply existing. Once you feel this in your bones, the entire moral map you lived by starts to shift. You no longer equate goodness with exhaustion. You begin to understand that the soul doesn't measure virtue in hours of unpaid emotional labor. It measures it in authenticity, in how true you remain to what is real within you. A person who honors their limits may give less, but what they give is clean, honest, and whole. That is the essence of integrity, the alignment of action with truth. And in that alignment, something miraculous happens. You stop viewing boundaries as barriers. You see them instead as expressions of respect for yourself and for others. A boundary is not a wall that says, "I don't care." It's a door that says, "I care enough to be clear." The more you live by that principle, the more your kindness changes flavor. It no longer tastes of exhaustion and quiet resentment. It becomes light, deliberate, sustainable. There's a particular peace that comes when you stop needing to be understood in order to be kind. You no longer need to defend your decisions, to justify your rest, to explain your silence. You begin to realize that kindness is not measured in smiles or apologies. It's measured in presence, in how fully you can show up without fragmenting yourself to fit expectations. You start to see the strange paradox of the world. It praises endless giving but despises those who finally stop. When you were available for everyone, they called you generous. When you learned to rest, they called you distant. When you forgave too quickly, they admired your heart. When you held someone accountable, they called you cold. But beneath these contradictions lies a truth about human nature. People are most comfortable with the version of you that serves them. The moment you begin to serve yourself, their comfort falters. Yet this discomfort is not your burden to carry. It is the world's mirror, shattering in front of its own expectations. The more you embody your truth, the more you reveal where others have mistaken control for connection. You learn that disappointing people is not cruelty. It is the inevitable consequence of living authentically. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is to let others face the discomfort of your boundaries, because only then can they see where they have crossed their own. You think of all the times you mistook silence for compassion, how often you tolerated disrespect because you didn't want to make a scene. But what if silence in those moments was not grace but avoidance? What if speaking up was the truest act of care, not only for yourself but for the relationship? Every genuine bond, after all, depends on truth. Without it, love becomes performance and connection becomes manipulation. As you start to live from this awareness, your emotional landscape begins to change. You find that saying no longer feels like rejection. It feels like honesty. You realize that empathy without boundaries is like water without a vessel. It spills everywhere and nourishes nothing. True empathy holds shape. It knows when to flow and when to stand firm. The more you practice this, the more your sense of identity transforms. You are no longer defined by what others need from you. You begin to see yourself as an independent consciousness, not a tool for comfort, not a mirror for others' approval, but a being with intrinsic direction. And that direction is guided not by guilt, but by truth. This shift feels subtle, yet seismic. You start to observe life from a new vantage point, where giving is no longer compulsion, but choice. You give because it aligns with your spirit, not because you fear the consequences of withholding. You help because it feels right, not because you crave validation. You listen not to fix, but to understand. It's strange at first, this freedom. You have moments where you question it. You wonder if you've become selfish. You wonder if your stillness is indifference, your silence apathy. But slowly you learn that peace is not the absence of care. It's the presence of clarity. You realize that the guilt you feel after saying no is just an echo of your old obedience, not a sign of wrongdoing. With every act of self-respect, the echo fades. You begin to notice how energy once wasted on pleasing others now returns to you as quiet vitality. You feel lighter, more centered. Life stops feeling like negotiation and starts feeling like dialogue. You no longer chase connection, you cultivate it. You no longer run from solitude, you rest in it. And in solitude, you meet yourself again, not as the role you played for others, but as the consciousness behind the performance. You discover that your value doesn't depend on how much you give, but on the depth of your being. You are not worthy because you are useful. You are worthy because you exist. This realization doesn't inflate your ego, it dissolves it. The constant striving to prove your goodness melts away, replaced by a quiet acceptance of what you already are. As you live from this new understanding, the world begins to reveal itself differently. You start to see the patterns of collective exhaustion everywhere, people racing to be enough, to be liked, to be seen as good. You recognize in their eyes the same weariness you once carried. But instead of judging, you feel compassion. You see that most people are not unkind. They are simply afraid. Afraid that if they stop performing virtue, they'll lose belonging. This insight doesn't make you superior. It makes you tender. You no longer preach or correct. You simply embody peace. You understand that the most powerful teaching is not in words, but in presence. To live calmly, to set boundaries without hostility, to forgive without erasing yourself. This becomes your silent offering to the world. And with that, your kindness changes once more. It becomes less about doing and more about being. You don't force understanding, you invite it. You don't demand reciprocity, you trust the natural balance of things. You don't cling to outcomes, you rest in intention. At times, people still misunderstand you. They will project their old expectations, hoping you'll return to the version of yourself that made them comfortable. But you no longer carry the need to defend who you've become. You simply smile, not with superiority, but with serenity, because you finally know. Kindness without truth is bondage, and kindness rooted in truth is liberation. Your liberation is quiet. There are no fireworks, no applause, just a deeper breath, a softer heart, a steadier gaze. You no longer confuse stillness with emptiness. Stillness is where you finally hear the sound of your own existence, the rhythm that was always there beneath the noise of people-pleasing. And as you listen, you realize that this rhythm, calm, steady, and honest, is what real kindness has always sounded like. As you move deeper into this awareness, something subtle begins to shift in the way you experience time. Moments that used to rush by in obligation now feel spacious, almost sacred. You begin to understand that when you stop living for approval, the world slows down. It stops demanding and it starts breathing with you. The noise of expectation fades, and for the first time in years, silence doesn't feel like punishment. It feels like return. In that return, you discover the simple dignity of being. You no longer see yourself as a problem to fix or a role to perform. You are simply here, a consciousness passing through this brief human experience, learning what it means to exist without distortion. Every time you act from truth, you realign yourself with life itself. You notice how peace is not something to be found outside, but something revealed when the inner argument ends. For so long, your mind debated between kindness and honesty, love and self-respect, giving and rest. But now these are no longer opposites. They are harmonies, different notes of the same truth. Kindness without honesty is manipulation. Honesty without kindness is cruelty. Together they form balance. You begin to practice this balance in small, almost invisible ways. You listen more carefully to your own body, to the tightening in your chest when you're about to betray yourself, to the ease that comes when you speak a truth you once feared. You learn to trust these signals as guidance, not weakness. Your body, after all, has always known what your mind denied. And slowly, you realize that boundaries are not just psychological, they are spiritual geometry, the structure through which love can safely flow. Without form, love floods and drowns. With form, it nourishes and sustains. Boundaries are love made intelligent. They say, I will love you, but not at the expense of my own soul. This realization reaches beyond relationships. You start to see how entire societies thrive on the labor of the overly kind, how institutions, families, and cultures often depend on those who cannot say no. The mythology of the good person becomes clearer to you. It was never about virtue, it was about control. A world that worships compliance needs people who confuse obedience with morality, but you no longer confuse them. You begin to see that morality, in its purest sense, is not obedience. It is consciousness. It is the ability to discern what honors life and what diminishes it. And any system that asks you to diminish yourself in the name of love or duty cannot be moral. From this vantage point, forgiveness changes meaning too. You once believed forgiveness meant excusing harm, pretending pain never happened. Now you see forgiveness as clarity, the decision to release the weight of resentment without denying the truth of the wound. Forgiveness is not amnesia, it is freedom. It's the ability to remember without remaining imprisoned by the memory. You also begin to sense the difference between compassion and attachment. Compassion sees another's suffering and wishes them peace, but it does not try to own the outcome. Attachment disguised as compassion tries to fix and save, not from love but from fear. The fear that if others remain broken, you'll be unloved for leaving them behind. Real compassion respects the autonomy of every soul. It says, I will walk beside you, but I will not walk for you. There are days when this new way of living feels lonely. You look around and see how few people understand it. The world still rewards noise over depth, compliance over clarity. People call your calmness detachment, your quiet confidence arrogance. But you no longer translate their misunderstanding as failure. You've learned that every new level of self-awareness demands a new kind of solitude. In that solitude, you meet strength that doesn't roar. You meet peace that doesn't perform. You meet the self that no longer begs to belong because it has finally come home. And when you do connect with others from this space, it feels different, cleaner, freer. Conversations become lighter because they are no longer negotiations for worth. You listen not to fix or impress, but to witness. You love not to fill emptiness, but to celebrate connection. It dawns on you that this is what maturity really means. Not perfection, but perspective. You no longer measure your life in what you achieve or how others see you, but in how present you are within it. You begin to understand that success is not applause, it's alignment. Joy is not excitement, it's acceptance. And as you watch people rush and compete, you feel compassion rather than envy. You understand that most of them are still trapped in the first stage of kindness, the stage of transaction, where love is earned and peace is postponed. You were there once. You remember the ache of it, the way you mistook exhaustion for purpose. That memory keeps you humble. It reminds you never to weaponize your awakening. True awakening, you realize, carries no pride. It's not about being above others, but being anchored within yourself. It's about holding space for the entire spectrum of the human condition, the fearful and the free, the asleep and the awake, without judgment. You see that every soul is on its own timetable. Some must lose themselves in endless giving before they learn the necessity of boundaries. Others must build walls before they learn the beauty of openness. There is no superiority, only stages of remembering, and remembering becomes your daily practice. You remember who you were before you were taught to be useful. You remember the small child who played without guilt, who existed without explanation. You realize that this child never died, only went quiet under the weight of expectation. To heal is to let that child speak again, to say yes when it's true and no when it's needed, to cry without apology, to rest without shame. You start to see life not as a performance to perfect, but as an unfolding to witness. Every interaction, every boundary, every silence becomes a meditation on authenticity. You no longer divide moments into good and bad. You understand that both are necessary for wholeness, like night and day, inhale and exhale. Even pain, once feared, now feels sacred because it no longer means punishment, it means growth. This perspective softens you in ways that surprise you. You become more patient, not less. You judge less quickly. You find beauty in imperfection, peace in uncertainty. You start to realize that the point was never to be endlessly nice, but endlessly real. And when you look back at the person you once were, the overgiver, the apologizer, the silent absorber of everyone else's chaos, you don't feel shame. You feel gratitude. Because that version of you was doing the best they could with the understanding they had. Without that exhaustion, you might never have sought peace. Without that pain, you might never have turned inward. The old self becomes a teacher, not a mistake. You thank them for their service, and you let them rest. Now you move through the world differently. Your kindness no longer demands an audience. It doesn't try to prove or earn. It simply radiates, quiet and unforced. You find that people respond to this energy in unexpected ways. Some draw closer, feeling seen for the first time. Others drift away, uncomfortable with a version of you they can no longer control. You let both happen. You understand that love filtered through truth naturally reorganizes the world around you. What stays belongs. What leaves was never meant to remain. This is freedom, not rebellion, not defiance, but release. Freedom from the compulsion to perform virtue. Freedom from the anxiety of being misunderstood. Freedom from the endless cycle of proving your heart. You no longer chase peace. You embody it. At night, when the world is quiet, you find yourself smiling for no reason. Not because everything is perfect, but because you finally are no longer at war with yourself. You've learned that peace is not found by being good, it's found by being whole. And in that wholeness, kindness returns to its purest form, not an effort, not a strategy, but a state of being. It is the natural fragrance of a soul that has stopped running from itself. You rest in this understanding like a lake after a storm, clear, still, reflecting light without distortion. You no longer need to convince anyone of your worth or goodness. The need itself has dissolved. All that remains is presence, simple, unshaken, kind. And from this place of quiet power, you look out at the world, the same world that once drained you, and realize that nothing outside you truly changed. Only your awareness did, and that awareness changes everything. So if you've been too nice for too long, this is your reminder. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to be misunderstood. You're allowed to disappoint people who never cared to understand you, because peace isn't about keeping everyone happy. It's about no longer betraying yourself to make them comfortable. Think of all the times you silenced yourself to avoid conflict. Think of all the times you gave more than you could. And ask yourself, what would it look like if I chose me just once? You don't have to become harsh. You don't have to stop caring. You just have to stop bleeding for people who never even noticed you were bleeding. Start small. Say no when you mean it. Rest when you're tired. Speak when something hurts. Love without losing yourself. This is not selfishness, it's self-preservation. And the world doesn't need another person who's kind to everyone but themselves. It needs someone who shows that gentleness and strength can coexist. That peace doesn't mean silence, it means alignment. That love doesn't mean compliance, it means truth. So be kind, but be honest. Be giving, but stay grounded. Be understanding, but never at the cost of your own soul. Because the world needs your light, not your exhaustion, your authenticity, not your approval, your truth, not your tolerance. If this message touched you, if it reminded you of something you've been forgetting deep inside, take a moment to share it. Not for numbers, not for views, but because someone out there is breaking quietly and needs to know they're not alone. Like, comment, and subscribe, not as a routine, but as a reflection. A small act of saying, I see myself in this. I'm ready to heal. And when you finish this video, sit for a moment in silence. Feel your breath. Notice your body and remember, you are not kind because you fear being unloved. You are kind because love already lives inside you. Protect it, guard it, cherish it, because that is the kind of kindness the world truly needs. The cost of being too nice is losing yourself, but the reward of awakening is finally finding peace within your own kindness.